me spin you a tale and yarn you a yarn upon the histories forgotten, erased from time immemorial, cementing the genocidal mechanisms sought by those engaged in the Nazi civil wars to overthrow the government through the use of espionage and the protection of secrets against national security, engaged in the mechanisms of targeting the country's most vital mechanisms, essential to its safety and prosperity, generating upon eons and histories and memorials, qualifying the eradication and editing of history for the psychopaths under the Unitary executive theory, believing that their executive privilege of unacquired offices through insurgency, through the mechanism of replacing those who would have lawfully acquired them, seek the Nazi insurrection, seek the KKK wizard insurrection, seeking the Confederates' summonings of their devils and their seances, arousing their satans and arousing their hatreds and arousing their bigotries for their substantive change of history as a mechanism of the subversion of all that is good and holy and stable in the contempt and hatred of the laws of nature and order itself. Qualify the assumption upon the 1960s, when Don Sr. would have been born and raised under the Bowles family, having been acquired amongst the triplets, was targeted by these mindless Satanist creeps seeking the Nazi overthrow of all that is stable under the service of the rule of law, of the law of nature, qualifying the barring by the rule of law against these mindless scum, qualifies the alterations away from the edits, certifying a positive upbringing by a loving family who would not have been coerced by the insurrection in order to turn on him, in order to make him suffer the exponential social traumas, in order to guide him into the influence predicted schedule of the fruit of the poison tree under Confederate order and dictate, qualifying his happy family, qualifying his father, who no longer been coerced into being a drunk, could certify his proper maintenance of his children, qualifying the raising of them under good moral standards, certifying their original education without the subversion and redirection into the insurgents in the military, overcoming their academies in order to control and dictate the schedule against the natural order, qualifying the ability to have engaged in these prosperities, the in-the-know qualifiers of those in the intelligence communities around the world, having estimated the 1986 tiger's birth upon Libra, would qualify the savior of Europe schedule, at which point the obligation for them to send their investments of their political powers, of their financial powers, would certify the exponential acceleration of the target in order to form a market around him, qualifying his exponential development, as not only would he be rich and well educated, but he would be exponentially refined to the purpose of the superior market, accelerating him beyond what even he might have imagined without them, qualifying the ability for him to engage in the developments of the high-grade education from the privileged schools, the School of Hard Knocks, and its various campuses developed throughout this mechanisms would have been scheduled and designed exponentially before he cemented himself in the 80s. Qualifying the advancement of this requires his exponential investment into the function and knowledge of the status quo in the trading community, qualifying his exponential trades, certifying the market's obligation in order to form a brokerage, in order to manufacture this oligarchical brokerage, in order to manufacture these security networks, qualifying what has to be separated for some other generations, that he can enjoy the full prosperity and potency of his life, which has been allotted for him as the generator of the Savior of Europe. Qualifying these exponential investments certifies his history of having actively been involved in the development of the higher grade motorcycle mechanisms, as well as education and trading, qualifying his place in the world, qualifying the development of the tracks upon the development of all blueprints for the School of Hard Knocks, as it would have at that point been fully saturated by the highest grade talent educators, qualifying their ability to engage in the highest grade education for future schemes and mechanisms necessary to the stability of the economy and the American will. Upon this development, you have the birth of his children, and upon the birth in 86 of his child, the title, David, targeted by the insurrectionists loyal to the Confederacy under the Unitary executive theory, certifying the position of those who have infiltrated the executive to overpower the function of their office and to exceed the barriers of equal branches, qualifying the subjugation of the legislature and of the judiciary as their fundamental loyalty is and has always been Nazism, unchecked and unbalanced Nazism, at which point the abuses of the insurrectionists being designed outside of the parameters and the purviews and the mechanisms and the schemes and the good justice weights would have prevented the procedure of due process against these mechanisms, which only pretend a mechanism of justice, but in reality have no loyalties to law, which is their immortal enemy. The development of these immortal enemies qualifies the fundamental arguments against David in their hatred for his schedule as their natural superior in every general way. At which point the development of the projections from these Confederate warrants certify the ability for them to have generated the qualifier of their abuses and their schedules against the family, at which point David, being ultimately changed from his original schedule, has been a POW, missing in action, obstructed from the Savior of Europe's contract schedule, which includes his trading of willful censorship through a non-disclosure agreement under the position of taking his station in the United States military as general of a new branch of the government over the intelligence agencies, certifying his lifelong venture and studies over American national secrets, qualifying the development of national security under its highest pretense and order, secured by his tutors and his teachers and support staffs from each of these various companies, including the staffs generating the development of the air security in New York, which Mattis knew would not be under their authority, as David is a co-equal branch of the military, at which point he would not accept the Confederate orders to shut off the planes, such as Rudy Giuliani, who redirected air security so that 9/11 could happen, as it was and has always been a Confederate plot of terror, in order to subsequently change the American policies, using fear in order to subjugate them. The subjugation and acceptance of the rulership's exceeding of limitations is the defeat in the War on Terror, which America lost tragically. At which point the position acknowledging the obstructed titles qualifies his position as general over the intelligence agencies, qualifies the president's protection against their terror plots, including the assassination attempts against them. At which point the histories being uncovered by the secrets would have engaged in the good faith investigation, as the intelligence oversight military police makes David Boal's character the highest law enforcement mechanism in the country, qualifying the arrest and procedure against the terrorists in question, throwing the book at the double agents who, hating this country to the core of their essence, would be the primary justification, beyond even payment, to their terrorist plots against the American population, as their KKK loyalties require them to engage in terrorist hate group functions, such as the use of violence against social engagements in order to substantially change cultures, such as the black community, which, having been substantially changed as a culture, turned into a self-destructive culture designed by the white nationalists who hate them, at which point the reference to the black community as a self-destructive community is designed as they are the victims and not the perpetrators of that culture. And so you have the hiring of propagandists in order to sell the alternate history, in order to blame the victims of the secrets, which by definition would not be acknowledged, at which point their act of intentional avoidance of said secrets is their fundamental confession to the general public. Their unwillingness to touch the issue is their acknowledgement to collaboration with the issue. At which point you have the assumption of the creation of the kingdoms and nations and arrangements throughout the international world, at which point you have the development of entertainment, which was projected to include Mario Brothers, at which point the position of Mario Brothers is you have the firstborn, which is connected to the Peach Princess, who, not technically or viably being a romantic interest or connection, would actively have to consistently be rescued in order to keep her kingdom, at which point the bully Bowser would actually be exponentially engaged in the act of human trafficking of the princess and of the kingdom for the replacement of one kingdom with the other, for the erasure and editing of the histories, qualifying the long-standing nation of the Koopas. At which point you also have the position as backup, the second-born, the child of green, who, engaging as the backup second player, would have to be independently wealthy to the kingdom in question, at which point the second-born, having no place in the inheritance of the kingdom that belongs to the princess and to the Mario, would have to find his own value, and at which point the development of the green in question would qualify the protected schedule as the savior of Europe in order to engage in the protected contract schedule, in order to engage in the development of his own kingdom, separate to all others, including his relationship, according to the narrative, with the development of Princess Daisy, who, being a kind of Anastasia, princess made commoner, who, having been overthrown by an evil Soviet sorcerer, seeks the restoration of her ability to exist in the general community, at which point the point of the damages in question would be seeking the permanent position of exponential injury to herself and those most intimately connected to her, at which point their active insults would be the attempt in order to traffic them, in order to separate them, to make them vulnerable to the rape culture's alterations to the general histories, qualifying their active insults to the sloppy seconds presumption, as the actual people who belonged with them were not able to control them, as they were raped by the mechanism of the human traffickers, forcing them into the alternate version for the purpose of the specific malice against the Luigi, and these presumptions of the Luigi would develop the position of the maintenance of the crafting of the Mario cards, which is the development of the assumption that Don Sr. would have engaged in the School of Hard Knocks in the development of the diversifications, at which point Don Sr. would be giving to his inheritance children the prospect of taking over all of the family businesses, and Don Sr., having developed his position in the pursuit of the high grade motorcycles, would have added small tracks to the mechanism of the schools, which could be downgraded for the children, which would engage in the go-karts in question, qualifying the Nintendo version of validating the original history as they are and have always been noble samurai who deserve all due respect, having aggressively protected their narrative, have conducted themselves in high morality and value.